Today we're going to be reading Harlem by Langston Hughes, analyzing it, and then writing our analysis paragraph. So our objective today is to analyze the imagery and the connotations of Hughes's diction in Harlem and how it connects to the author's purpose as we write a paragraph. So first we have to read the poem, and we're going to be reading the poem and thinking about how can we analyze the imagery. So there's a few steps that you can take to analyze the imagery. First, we're going to read the poem and we'll pick out important images that stand out to us. Then we're going to consider the connotations that surround those images. And then in step 3, we'll finally think about why did the poet use these images? What effect is it supposed to have on the reader and its ultimate purpose? So let's read Harlem together. So Harlem by Langston Hughes says, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?" So in this first section, when we see what happens to a dream deferred, this is a rhetorical question. It forces any audience member to reckon with this question. And so if we were to unpack this image of a dream, we know that a dream connotes hope, plans, freedom. And when we think about the word deferred, that means postponed or delayed. So the dream isn't something that's been forgotten. It is still held onto by the dreamer, and they're still hoping that the dream will come true. However, it is still postponed and delayed. So first, we're going to look at our first image where there's a simile of comparing a dream deferred to a dried up raisin in the sun. So we want to unpack this one because it's the first image, and we want to think about what does it mean, what does it matter, and how does this connect to the poem's overall purpose. So we know that grapevines are typically symbolic of pleasure, vitality, fruitfulness, and we have associations with that in our mind of wine and the harvest. But when a grape is left out in the sun, like all of us in Temecula know, if it's neglected and forgotten, the sun will beat it down, and the sun's harsh rays will turn it into a wrinkled raisin. Not something that you want to have happen to your dreams, right? The next simile that we see is comparing a dream deferred to a running, festering sore. This seems like an important image. So to unpack this, we would think about what do we imagine when we imagine a sore? Well, sores fester, they ooze, and they do that when we haven't taken care of them, when they have been neglected. So in the same way, a dream that has been neglected or postponed or hasn't received the proper care and treatment is also going to create a bitter wound in the dreamer, his or herself. Finally, we see, we're going to skip the stink like rotten meat. You guys can kind of imagine that. But to crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet, how does that have to do with a dream deferred? Well, when we have a candy, something that should be delightful and delicious, when it's left out, neglected, and forgotten, it tends to harden and crust over, maybe you've seen this before, into something inedible and overly sweet. So when we have a dream that is deferred or postponed or delayed, similarly, it might be a delicious hope, but when left vulnerable too long, it becomes sickly sweet or a false hope. And then finally, at the very end, we have this really important image of an explosion. And so this explosion conjures the idea of a dramatic and abrupt end. And notice it's also at the end of the poem. So explosions may also evoke images of riots and rebellions. And after experiencing a dream deferred, we might understand that that people who have experienced a dream deferred may lead to open rebellion or an explosion. Well, in this, we should see the imagery of suns, sores, stinking meat, sugar, and heavy loads, and that could all conjure images to our mind of sugar plantations where Blacks previously worked as slaves. So now we're going to take all of the reading that we just did, and we're going to write an analysis paragraph. And our first step is to write a topic sentence that is arguable and focused. And when we write our topic sentence, we need to include the author's name, the poem, which should be in quotation marks, the literary technique that we're examining, and the meaning created through that technique. So here's an example. I might write something like, in Langston Hughes' poem Harlem, the speaker uses a series of decaying similes to argue that dreams, when not cared for, are vulnerable to the same forces of decay and hurt. So here, notice I'm using the author's name to begin. I also have the poem in quotation marks. I refer to the speaker as the subject. And then I have the literary technique, a series of decaying similes, and using series of decaying similes is a little bit more sophisticated than just saying similes. And then I'm going to show what effect it has. Well, the similes have the effect of arguing that dreams, when they aren't cared for, are vulnerable to the same forces of disease and hurt. So when we are choosing our evidence, we want to make sure that there is a strong connection between the images that we're unpacking and the actual meaning of the poem. So here, the decaying similes relate to these dreams that are also decaying. They're also uncared for and vulnerable, and we see what happens to both of those similarly. So the next step after we've written our topic sentence is to use evidence that proves our argument. And when we include evidence that needs to be a meaningful literary technique, we need to use little baby quotes when we're quoting it. So for example, I might say, first, the speaker asks the audience if a dream deferred or a hope postponed or delayed dries up like a raisin in the sun, evoking an image of a neglected grape beaten down by the sun's harsh rays. In this, you'll notice that first we have context telling us where in the poem this is taking place and what is happening in this imagery. The speaker is asking the audience. And then you'll see we've got some baby quotes, dream deferred, and then I explain what a dream deferred is, and then dries up like a raisin in the sun. That's also a very small baby quote. I'm not quoting a ton of text. And then at the very end, I'm weaving in some commentary to suggest what I'm going to be proving in my next set of commentary. So it evokes an image of a neglected grape beaten down by the sun's harsh rays. So now that we have brought in evidence, we want to analyze the image. And when we are writing our analysis or commentary, we want to think about what are the connotations of the image, what is its effect on the reader, and how does it contribute to the author's purpose. With our commentary, we might say something like, grapes connotate lush harvest and intoxicating wine, which contrasts with the image of a withered and wrinkled raisin. By comparing a dream deferred with a raisin, the speaker suggests that when dreams, like vital, juicy grapes, are subjected to oppressive forces like the sun, they too wither. Through the imagery of a raisin, the reader feels the senseless and material loss of dreams deferred. So the first part of my commentary is just unpacking the connotations of some of these images of grapes. When we think of grapes, when we think of prosperity, harvest, wine, and then the difference between grapes and a raisin. A raisin evokes and connotes something that is smaller, something that is hollowed out, something that is wrinkled and not as prosperous. In this next section, when I say by comparing a dream deferred with a raisin, the speaker suggests that when dreams, like vital, juicy grapes, are suggested to oppressive forces like the sun, they too wither. This is where I'm explaining how the imagery of a raisin reveals the purpose of how that connects with a dream deferred and how that relates to the idea of these oppressive forces that are causing dreams to be deferred and causing raisins to dry up in the sun. And then finally, in the last section of commentary, now I know that you've been taught to only have two sentences of commentary, but really you can have more than 2 sentences if you would like to continue to unpack things. And then as you become more sophisticated, you'll be able to weave in more evidence throughout this. And so there'll be this beautiful weaving of evidence and commentary all throughout your analysis. But sticking here, this sentence says, through the imagery of a raisin, the reader feels the senseless and material loss of dreams deferred. This talks about how this image of a raisin in the sun is impacting the reader. It tells us that the reader feels bummed out. They feel lost. They feel empathy for what is happening. So the last part of this is we have to write a concluding sentence that connects back to the topic sentence. So our concluding sentence, we might say something like, Hughes uses decaying imagery to urgently force his readers to imagine the experiences of many Black Americans who have hurt from the loss of their own dreams. And on our concluding sentence, we are restating what was proven. However, we're connecting the poem to a broader, more global significance by tying in how this relates to the experiences of many Black Americans, which if we were to develop this into an essay, we would want to expand in our concluding paragraph and tying it in with how Langston Hughes was using the title of Harlem and the significance of the title of the poem and how that relates to the claim that he's making and the global significance about what he might be suggesting about Black Americans' experience with their dreams being deferred. So hopefully this has taught you how to read a poem, analyze it, and how to write a simple analysis paragraph.